This right here is the Nintendo Switch. Time to review it. The year is 2017. The Wii U is a failure, and the 3DS is 4 years into its lifespan and is due for an upgrade. Nintendo was kind of in a weird position at this time. They knew they had to make a comeback from their failing home console, but they also knew that their handheld was due for a successor. Definitely a tricky situation. And so when they unveiled their next console, they decided to do something that they had never done before. Is it going to be a new home console or a new handheld? Well, why not both? And in early 2017, Nintendo unveiled the Nintendo Switch, their very first home/handheld console hybrid. It was definitely a surprising reveal in the sense that it was something completely new that Nintendo hasn't done before. They completely retired the DS/3DS name branding and completely retired the Wii and Wii U name branding for something entirely different. The Nintendo Switch. Because you can switch up the ways that you play it. You can connect it to your TV and use it as a home console, or use it on the go as a handheld. And it was an absolutely ingenious idea. The Nintendo Switch is probably one of Nintendo's biggest comebacks. It's no surprise why the Nintendo Switch has gone on to sell over 150 million units worldwide, making it the second best-selling Nintendo system right next to the Nintendo DS. So the Nintendo Switch had a few models throughout its lifespan. There was the original model in 2017, and then in 2019 they released the Switch Lite, where it was a handheld-only version of the Switch, and at a reduced price. And then later in 2020, Nintendo unveiled the Nintendo Switch OLED model, which is the one that you see in front of you right now, where it upgraded the LCD display with a bigger OLED display and changed up the design a little bit. And in my opinion, is definitely the best model to get. It's no surprise why the Switch has worked out so well for Nintendo. So much so that when they unveiled their next console, they decided to basically do the same thing and called it the Switch 2, which is slated to be released later this year as of recording this video. So for a backstory with my experience with the Switch, I had a Wii U at the time, and I was a die-hard Wii U fan and was in complete denial about how badly that system was selling. But I'm not going to lie, when I saw the Switch unveiled in 2017, I was definitely intrigued. I was in college at the time, and I remember seeing all my friends who had a Wii U pretty much ditching it instantly when the Switch came out. And, I mean, I don't blame them. It's a brand new, exciting Nintendo system. And Nintendo would end up porting over a good majority of the Wii U games to the Switch. Games like Mario Kart 8, Super Mario 3D World, New Super Mario Bros. U, Bayonetta 2, Pikmin 3, Xenoblade Chronicles X, and many other Wii U exclusives made the jump to the Switch, and usually came with pretty much all the DLC that originally came with those Wii U versions, as well as a few like quality of life tweaks. So let's take a closer look at this thing. So on the Switch OLED model, it has, I want to say it's like a 7 or 8 inch OLED display with a resolution of 720p. And yeah, it looked pretty good with the original LCD panel on the original Switch, but on the OLED, it just looks beautiful. Just colors just pop right off the screen. Hence why it is definitely the most recommended model to get. We have our standard affair of buttons, the analog sticks, which also click in. We have our A, B, Y, and X buttons. We have a home button to access the home menu, We have our plus button and minus buttons, which basically equate to the start and select buttons. We have a capture button to basically capture screenshots and videos in games, and 4 directional buttons instead of a regular D-pad. Mainly because the controllers are removable. And if you turn the controllers on their side, you can use them for split screen multiplayer in handheld mode. See, this whole Nintendo Switch name is definitely making a lot more sense now, isn't it? On the side of each Joy-Con, we have our dedicated SL and SR buttons. These basically equate to shoulder buttons when you're using the controller like this. We have LED indicators that indicates the number of players as well as battery life. Controller sync button, and then there's a little tiny connector right there that connects to the actual Switch console itself, and basically it provides a way to use the controllers directly to the console, and it also charges the controllers as well. We also have our L and R shoulder buttons as well as ZR and ZL buttons. And a new feature that they added specifically on the right Joy-Con is an IR sensor. There weren't a whole lot of games that took advantage of this, and I want to say it was also used as like a actual like pointer in a game, kind of like they did with the Wii remotes. But I could be wrong. I don't have any games that actually utilize this, so I'm not entirely sure. Another new feature that they added with the Joy-Cons is a thing called HD Rumble. Basically, instead of having a traditional rumble motor like most controllers, the Joy-Cons, in terms of rumble capabilities, it works more like the haptic feedback that you normally have in like your phone. Basically, the haptic feedback inside of the Joy-Cons will vibrate at different frequencies depending on what you're doing. The DualSense on the PS5 works in kind of a similar way. So, for example, if you're like warping to a new world, the Joy-Cons will vibrate at different frequencies to make it feel like you're like warping to a new world. Another example that Nintendo specifically described was being able to feel ice cubes individually moving around in a glass. I'm not sure if I explained it very well, probably didn't. You just have to experience it for yourself. You do have several options when it comes to control schemes when connected to a TV. You can either use Joy-Cons like this on their own, or the system comes with a controller adapter so that you can use the Switch Joy-Cons in a more traditional controller configuration. There is also the option of using the Switch Pro controller, which is usually the preferred way of playing the Switch on the TV. Which, just like the right Joy-Con, the Switch Pro controller also has NFC built in for using amiibos. The Pro controller also has HD Rumble, and the Pro controller also has gyroscope, just like the Joy-Cons. Taking a closer look at the system itself, on the bottom we have 2 speakers, which sound pretty decent. We have a USB-C connector. This is used for charging as well as connecting it to the dock that connects to the TV. On the top we have a power button, volume buttons, a cooling fan, a headphone jack. This is where we put our Switch cartridges, which, yes, unlike the Wii U, they went back to cartridges for the Switch. This does mean that there is absolutely no backwards compatibility with the Wii U software at all. Although, considering that a good majority of Wii U's exclusives have Switch ports, I don't really see that as really a big deal. On the back of the system, we have a Nintendo Switch logo, and on the original model, it did have a kickstand, but it was just a little tiny plastic piece here. Well, on the OLED model, they made it a lot better. Instead of a flimsy piece of plastic, the kickstand basically extends throughout the entire bottom part of the Switch and is really, really solid. And it has quite the range of movement. So you could have your Switch standing up like this, or you could even have it laying down like this at an angle. When you put up your kickstand, it's not going anywhere. That thing is solid. Open the kickstand is where we can put our micro SD card for expanded storage. Here's the dock for the Nintendo Switch, which allows us to connect it to the TV. Aesthetically, compared to the original dock, it's pretty much the exact same. There's a few physical tweaks here and there, but honestly, the really big difference is this has built-in Ethernet where the original dock does not. But you can still use a USB to Ethernet adapter on there. Connecting the Switch to the dock is pretty straightforward. All you gotta do is line it up, slide in place until you hear a click, and there you go. You're playing a TV mode. So what are the specs of the Nintendo Switch? Well, for starters, it has a NVIDIA Tegra X1 system on a chip. For a CPU, it has an ARM4 Cortex-A57 clocked at 1.2 gigahertz. For memory, it has 4 gigabytes of LPDDR4 RAM. For storage, it has 32 gigabytes of integrated eMMC memory on the Switch OLED that is increased to 64 gigabytes. And storage can be expanded with a micro SD card up to 2 terabytes. For display, the original model of the Switch used a 6.2-inch LCD panel with a resolution of 1280 by 720. The Switch Lite has the same resolution, but with a 5.5-inch screen. And the Switch OLED has a 7-inch display with, again, a 720p resolution. For graphics, the Switch uses an NVIDIA Maxwell-based GPU that's integrated in the Tegra X1 chip and is clocked at 768 megahertz when docked and underclocks it to 307 megahertz when playing portably to save battery life. Docked performance is about 393 gigaflops and undocked performance is about 236 gigaflops. For sound, the Switch supports linear PCM 5.1 channel surround sound when docked, and then when in portable mode, it uses linear PCM 2.0 channel stereo speakers with pseudo surround sound. The right Joy-Con has a built-in IR receiver that's used for ambient light censoring. All models of the Switch have a multi-touch capacitive screen. For connectivity, the Switch supports Wi-Fi 5 at 2.4 or 5 gigahertz and Bluetooth 4.1. For power, it has a 3.7 volt 4310 milliamp hour lithium-ion battery. Battery life is about 2.5 to 6.5 hours on the original model and the Lite, while the OLED model has a battery life of about 4.5 to 9 hours. The Switch uses as little as 7.5 watts when in sleep mode or charging, and up to 39 watts when connected to the TV. And finally, the Switch OLED model measures in at 6.9 by 4 by 0.55 inches for the system itself, and then with the Joy-Cons attached, it measures in at 9.5 by 4 by 0.55 inches and weighs approximately 11.3 ounces without the Joy-Cons and about 15 ounces with the Joy-Cons. Let's talk about the physical games that I have for the Nintendo Switch, which, these cartridges, they are tiny. I'd say they're about 3/4 to half the size of a DS or 3DS cartridge. And because of that cartridge format, that does mean that physical games for Switch are a little more expensive compared to other platforms, especially the first-party Nintendo ones, which is why I don't have a whole lot of physical Switch games. A good majority of my library is digital. However, with the Switch 2 on the horizon, as well as backwards compatibility, I am hoping that physical games for Switch get cheaper over time. But if you mainly buy digital games, good news is the eShop has frequent sales and discounts. Starting things off, we have Super Mario Odyssey. This was a huge announcement for Switch. So this was released close to the end of the launch year of the Switch in 2017. And it was pretty much the very first truly open world Mario game. And it was, no surprise, fantastic. Controls are tight and fluid. The game actually looks pretty good for the Switch, and overall is definitely a must-have title for Switch. Wonder if this will get a sequel on Switch too. Hopefully. Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. This was definitely an intriguing title when it was first announced. If you're familiar with the Rabbids series, it is a series made by Ubisoft, and it used to be part of the Rayman series, but later got spun off onto its own franchise. And the last thing anybody expected for a Switch game was a collab with Nintendo and Ubisoft to make a Mario plus Rabbids game. Definitely an odd combination, and you wouldn't think it would work, but surprisingly, for the most part, it does. It's essentially a turn-based strategy game, which I'm not very good at those games to begin with, which is why I haven't finished this game yet, but if you're into those types of games, it's definitely a good one. The game looks pretty decent. There's a good selection of characters and customizability, and overall has some pretty good turn-based gameplay. It may not be for everybody, considering that it's a turn-based game, but I would still at least give it a try. It's definitely unique. This game also got a sequel a couple years later, Splatoon 2, which is obviously a sequel to Splatoon on the Wii U, and a very, very good one. Pretty much everything that everybody loved about the first game is here, and then some. Brand new weapons, brand new gameplay mechanics, a brand new single-player campaign, revamped multiplayer modes, plus a second DLC campaign. It's exactly what a sequel should be. They would later on release Splatoon 3 in 2023, which further improved the franchise, just like the second game. With the original Splatoon servers on Wii U shut down, I would definitely recommend going with Splatoon 2 or 3. Definitely one of the biggest announcements for the Switch, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. This may be one of the best Smash Bros. Games to date. It has an insane amount of content, tighter and faster gameplay compared to Wii U and 3DS Smash Bros., improved online multiplayer, and the biggest fighter roster to date. There's a reason why it's called Smash Bros. Ultimate. Like, I'm sure we're probably going to end up getting a Smash Bros. Game on Switch too, but I gotta say, it's going to be really, really difficult to follow up Smash Bros. Ultimate. It is a must-own for Switch. Absolutely fantastic. Super Mario Bros. Wonder. This was the first 2D side-scroller Mario game that we got since New Super Mario Bros. U. And while yes, that game was good, at the time, 2012 and 2013, people are starting to get burnt out on the 2D Mario games, considering that there wasn't a whole lot of innovations. But man, all of that changed with Super Mario Bros. Wonder. This game showed that 2D Mario games can still be great. Tons of unique levels, fantastic gameplay, tight controls. Compared to Super Mario Bros. U, Wonder is a huge, huge improvement. Definitely one of the best 2D Mario games to date. And definitely a must-own for Switch. Bayonetta 3. This is obviously a sequel to Bayonetta 2 that originally released on Wii U. And it's a pretty good one. If you played any of the previous Bayonetta games, it's more or less the same with a few new things here and there. Although that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not all perfect, though. The story can be a little confusing. There's a few technical issues here and there, especially in the frame rate department. But overall, I'd say it's a pretty good conclusion to the Bayonetta trilogy, and I do recommend it. Plus, the previous two games did get ports on Switch as well. And finally, we have Metroid Prime Remastered. Now, if you're going to make a remaster of an old GameCube game, this is exactly how you should do it. This is an amazing remaster. Pretty much the core gameplay of the original game is all intact, and ends up controlling better than the original with a modern control scheme, and looks absolutely beautiful on Switch. Yeah, like I said, it's an amazing remaster. I most definitely recommend it. And with Metroid Prime 4 on the horizon, I'm definitely excited to see what they're going to do next. And I'm interested to see if they're going to do more remasters of the other two Metroid Prime games. I really hope they do. This is exactly how a remaster should be done. Let's power this thing up and show more of it. So pressing the power button, we get a Nintendo logo, followed by the Nintendo Switch logo. And we're in. So pretty much at this screen, all you have to do is connect a Joy-Con or Pro controller, press the A button 3 times, and here's the main menu. Very clean looking. Everything is pretty much right in front of you, easily accessible. Yeah, very functional. I do wish that it had maybe a little bit more flair and personality like the Wii U menu, but for what the Switch has, it works, and it works pretty well. So on the main menu, we have these tiles that shows our most recent applications. We have our profile settings on the top left side of the screen. And on the top right side, we have the current time, your wireless connection, and your battery percentage. Down at the lower left, it shows the connected controllers. In the bottom right shows a legend of button functionalities for the main menu. From this screen, you have the option to either launch an application, or if you press the plus sign, it pulls up a more detailed view of the selected application, where you can jump to the Nintendo eShop, look at support information, as well as other copyright info for the application. Software update allows us to force a manual update to check to see if there's a new version of your application. Manage software is where we can either transfer our save data, archive the software, where basically it'll keep the software on the main screen. It'll just delete the data to free up storage, and then all you have to do is select it and it'll re-download it again. Or you can always delete the software and it will be removed from the home menu. We can also access cloud save data and view our My Nintendo rewards. And if you want a more extensive view of your overall library that's installed on the Switch, just navigate to the end of the screen and select all software, where you can basically view all of the software that is currently installed on your Switch. With the L and R shoulder buttons, you can sort and filter your games by time last played, playtime, titles, publisher, that sort of thing. You can also sort your applications into various little groups. So the way I have it set up is I have a group for all my demos, my physical games, my digital games, and my applications. Let's take a closer look at this set of buttons on the lower part of the menu. This button will allow us to access the Nintendo Switch Online page, where we can view our subscription information for Nintendo Switch Online, as well as other functionalities that are related to that. The news section is where we can view news for upcoming games, as well as announcements for new sales on the eShop. Nintendo eShop is obviously where we access the digital storefront for your Switch applications. Album is where we can access our screenshots as well as video captures. From here, you can filter your captures. Selecting a video or screenshot allows you to either post it on social media, add some text if it's a screenshot, or you can trim and edit if it's a video capture. You can copy or delete, as well as sending it to your smartphone for backup. The controller option is where we can view our controller settings. From here, we can change the grip/order of our controllers. We can find our controllers. So with this, you select the controller that you want to look for, and it'll vibrate that controller in case you happen to misplace your controller so you can easily find it. It's also a good way to test the rumble features of your controllers to make sure that they're functioning correctly. We can pair new controllers from this screen as well. This screen will also view the battery percentage of our Switch, as well as the battery for our controllers. System settings is obviously where we can adjust our system settings. We've got some various options here. We can view support/health and safety information, set airplane mode, adjust our screen brightness, set up Bluetooth audio, set our screen lock options, set up parental controls, set up our internet connections, data management, options for our user accounts, our Mii's, which, yeah, surprisingly, the Switch does indeed have Mii's. Although I don't think you can transfer your Mii's from your Wii or your Wii U to Switch, unfortunately. We can also access settings for our amiibos, select a theme, which, yeah, unfortunately, we only have two, either basic black or basic white. Not a whole lot of customizability, unfortunately. I do hope that they give us at least a few more options with the Switch 2. Moving further down the line, we can access our notification settings, our sleep mode, controllers and sensors, TV settings, and general system settings. And the last button here is a sleep mode shortcut, so we can instantly put the Switch into sleep mode. So let's go over my digital games that I have in my library. Now, I have quite a few digital games, so I am going to gloss over a good majority of these, but I will highlight some of my favorites. So first off, we have Ziggurat. I have this on my Wii U, but it plays significantly better on Switch. And the sequel, Ziggurat 2, also is good on the Switch. Torchlight 2, a very, very good roguelite dungeon crawler. I love me some dungeon crawler RPGs, and Torchlight 2 is a really, really good one. Yes, it is a Diablo clone, but it's a really good one. Portal and Portal 2 made the jump to Switch, and they are really, really good ports. It's definitely a very weird thing seeing Valve publishing games on the Switch, but yet, here they are. Imagine if they bring the Half-Life series to Switch or the Switch 2. That would be awesome. And in my opinion, Portal and Portal 2 is the best way to play the game on console, because unlike the PS3 and 360 versions, the Switch versions of these games run at a buttery smooth 1080p 60 FPS, and they look great. Yooka-Laylee. This was a kickstarted indie game, I want to say back in like 2015, 2016, somewhere around then. This game takes heavy inspiration from Rare's Banjo-Kazooie series. The game looks and plays pretty good. I haven't played a whole lot of this, but from what I've played so far, I have genuinely enjoyed it. It's a good 3D platformer, heavily inspired by the 90s platformers. Yeah, give it a try. We've got a couple other ones here, like Star Wars Hunters, Rise, Race the Future, a little Golf Journey. I haven't played any of these so far. Now, this is one that I was very excited to see. Beyond Good and Evil 20th Anniversary Edition. Beyond Good and Evil is one of my favorite games, and being able to play it on modern platforms is amazing. I haven't played it on here yet. From what I've heard, really the only downside about the Switch version is that it runs at 30 FPS versus 60 on the other platforms. But honestly, it doesn't bother me all that much. It pretty much ran at 30 FPS back on the PS2 when I first played the game. So, which Ubisoft, are you going to give us an update on Beyond Good and Evil 2? I'm still waiting. Grid Autosport. This game originally came out in 2014 on the 360 and PS3, and then got a port on Switch back in like 2019, 2020. It is definitely, in my opinion, one of the best racing simulators on Switch. And looks and runs pretty well on the Switch. Definitely recommend this one if you're into racing simulators. I also have Torchlight 3 on here. Actually didn't end up liking it as much as Torchlight 2. Maybe I'll give it another chance eventually. The Elder Scrolls Blades. This was originally ported from Android and iOS, and it plays relatively well on Switch. The frame rate can dip at times, and load times can be extensive, but the game is free to play, so that is definitely a plus. I also have Doom and Doom 2 on here. I've got City of Brass, Grip, Mean Greens, Speedrunners. Oh, I love me some Speedrunners. It is definitely one of my favorite games of all time. I will never get tired of speedrunners. It is a fantastic indie game and one of my favorite indie games. I also have Fury Unleashed on here, Hades, which is really, really good. Definitely recommend playing it. Here's another 90s inspired platformer, Hellpie. Just like Yooka-Laylee, this game is heavily inspired by those early 90s 3D platformers. It's gory, it's raunchy, it is absolutely ridiculous, but it is still a fantastic platformer. It may not be for everybody, considering this game does have some rather explicit content, but if you're into platformers, I do recommend giving Hellpie a try. I also have Ultimate Chicken Horse. That is really, really fun to play with friends. The Last Campfire, Rayman Legends, Rock of Ages 3. I've got No More Heroes 1 and 2 on here. Also haven't played them yet. I've heard they play really good on Switch though. I have Quake and Quake 2 on here, which play wonderful on Switch, especially with gyroscopic gaming. Firewatch, Curse of the Dead Gods, Mortal Kombat 11, which is actually a fairly decent port. It's a much better port than Mortal Kombat 1 on Switch though. If you're going to have a Mortal Kombat game on Switch, I do recommend going with 11 over 1, because, at least in my opinion, Mortal Kombat 11 is a little more polished. It's not without its issues, though. Cutscenes run at a really unstable 30 FPS. Load times can be really long. And the game doesn't quite keep a constant 60 FPS during fights. But other than that, it's a decent way to play the game on the go. I've got Wheel of Fortune, Pac-Man Museum, love me some Namco Museum games, Pumpkin Jack, Moonlighter, Sega Virtual Racing, which is a really, really good remaster of the arcade game. Always gotta have some pool games, because I'm a sucker for pool games. I have no idea why. I have to at least have 1 or 2 pool games for every console I own. We also have Rock of Ages 2, Call of Juarez Gunslinger, Strike 10-Pin Bowling, Hot Shots Racing, which is heavily inspired by Virtual Racing, and Doom 64, which I do recommend giving Doom 64 a play. It is very underrated. And then I also have some applications like YouTube. I want to say Hulu is also on Switch, along with Crunchyroll, but those are really the only 3 notable streaming services that Switch has. There's no Netflix or Amazon Prime Video or Tubi TV, any of those other ones, unfortunately. I mentioned earlier that the Switch OLED is definitely the model to get, because compared to the LCD panel on the regular Switch and Switch Lite, it just looks so much better. Colors just pop right off the screen, and the picture quality is really, really sharp. It is still running at 720p, but honestly, with that OLED screen, it still ends up looking really, really good. The OLED model also has better speakers compared to the original models, and gets decently loud too. That's the system at max volume. Gets decently loud. There is a lack of bass, and the sound does tend to sound a little tinny at times, but overall, it works, and it does sound slightly better compared to the Switch and the Switch Lite. Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who knows Nintendo controllers, but the face buttons are really nice and tactile, very responsive. The analog sticks are also really responsive on the Joy-Cons. Although I have heard from some people they can suffer from stick drift over time. I've had my Switch OLED since 2022 or 2023, and honestly, I haven't had any issues with stick drift yet. Although the Switch Pro controller, as far as I'm aware, doesn't have this problem. The Joy-Cons, unfortunately, don't have a traditional D-pad, which can make playing 2D titles a little more awkward. I do understand why they don't have a normal D-pad, because otherwise using them sideways and like co-op multiplayer and tabletop mode wouldn't really work all that well. There is third-party left Joy-Cons that do have a D-pad, although usually that comes at the cost of a lack of HD rumble, and no gyroscopic aiming. That's why when it comes to 2D titles, I usually end up using my Switch Pro controller because luckily that works with the Switch whether you're docked or undocked. Gyroscopic aiming on the Switch Pro controller and Joy-Cons is surprisingly enjoyable to use, especially when it comes to first-person shooters. And the gyroscopic aiming on the Joy-Cons does work whether you have them attached to the Switch or not. I'm going to try my best to show the HD rumble on camera. I don't know if my microphones are going to pick it up very well, but like I mentioned with the HD rumble, it does add a little more realism in the game. Like firing my gun, for example, it vibrates to simulate more recoil. I don't know how well that came off on camera. Like I said, it is something that you can't really demonstrate unless you're using it yourself. In terms of graphical capabilities, the Switch is obviously less powerful than the PS4 and Xbox One. But that didn't prevent developers of trying to leverage the system's limitations as best as they possibly could. I mean, we got games like Dune 2016, The Witcher 3, and even frickin' Mortal Kombat 11 on Switch. Although with some of these more demanding third-party games, just because you can put them on the Switch doesn't necessarily mean you should. In my opinion, it seems like the Switch is twice as powerful, maybe 2.5 times more powerful than the Wii U. So it's not a monumental jump. It is apparent that there are games on Switch that could never run on Wii U or really run as well as they do on the Switch. And as impressive as it is to have some of those games like The Witcher 3 and Dune 2016 on Switch, the developers did have to do some cutbacks in order to have it run on Switch acceptably. Mortal Kombat 11 here, for example, right now it's a relatively stable 60 FPS during fights. Although in like more heavier fights with a lot of particles, it does tend to dip. In the cutscenes, when it's introducing the fighters, it just barely reaches 30 FPS. And a lot of the models do look a little on the fuzzy side. There isn't really a whole lot of anti-aliasing. And the game is using a dynamic resolution, so chances are, at least in handheld mode, Mortal Kombat 11 is most definitely not running in 720p. It may actually be less than that. Though, from what I've seen with the Switch 2, it does seem like there is more graphical capabilities compared to the original Switch, so that will definitely be really nice so that we're able to have more graphically intensive games. And so, that was the Nintendo Switch OLED. The fact that Nintendo was able to do a complete 180 from the Wii U by releasing the Switch is nothing short of impressive. It's such an ingenious design. Like, it's no surprise why the Switch has sold so well for Nintendo. So that begs the question, should you buy a Nintendo Switch in 2025? I'd say it definitely depends. With the Switch 2 on the way and backwards compatibility, I'd say for those who don't have a Switch already, just save the money and buy a Switch 2. You'll be getting more features plus that backwards compatibility with nearly every single original Switch game. But if you can find a really good deal, especially on like the Switch Lite, if you just need a system for handheld gaming and nothing else, then yeah, I would still recommend buying a Switch, especially those on a budget, because understandably, $450 may be a lot of money for people to buy a brand new system. So if you can get a good deal on any Switch model, then yeah, if you're on a budget, it's definitely still a really, really good option. The Switch is still immensely popular, and there's still a lot of games that are on the way for the Switch. So that was my review of the Nintendo Switch. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. And if you flip the controllers sideways, you can use them for multiplayer. That scared the crap out of me. Holy shit.